Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce my colleague and our presenter this evening, Priscilla Andrews. Priscilla joined the Cancer Wellness Center's clinical staff in 2007. She holds a master's in community counseling from Loyola University, Chicago, and has completed her postgraduate training in polyvagal theory and emotionally focused therapy. In addition to working with people through the counseling program at the center, she also facilitates a monthly multiple myeloma networking group. Her areas of interest include survivorship issues, building motivation for behavioral changes, recovery from trauma, and couples work. Welcome, Priscilla. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Savina. I have to admit, I'm so used to moderating programs by myself and introducing myself. I don't even know what to say now, other than to welcome everybody here with us this evening. And thank you for joining me for this program. Hopefully you're all in the right place. We're all here to talk about, or at least for you guys to listen to me talk about coping with a blood cancer diagnosis. So let me go ahead and share my screen. So I want to start off by just giving a little disclaimer here. So, everybody I'm guessing is here tonight because in some way you have been impacted by a blood cancer diagnosis. Perhaps you're the person with the diagnosis, perhaps it's your partner or spouse, your child, your parent, another loved one, or a friend that's brought you to this program. What I want to be upfront about is I am not a medical professional. So my expertise here, I'm a mental health professional. I've worked with the cancer community for just over 15 years now. And so hopefully today, rather than my focus being on how to cope with the medical, physical side effects that come up related to a diagnosis, I'm here to talk about how do you cope in life when part of that life now involves a blood cancer diagnosis. If you came here and you thought that I was going to talk about the medical stuff, give me a shot. Stick around for a few slides and see if there might be something that you can take away. So welcome with that. And there will be the Q&A. So you can feel free throughout the program to put in questions. I know that Savina and Carrie will be monitoring that to let me know. You're welcome to ask questions along the way, or if you need me to slow down or explain something a little bit further. But just know I'm not going to be able to address questions that are medically related. So what's brought you here, right? What's brought you here is that at some point in time, maybe very recently, maybe several years ago, you were diagnosed or somebody you love was diagnosed with cancer. So at some point you heard some form of the words, you have cancer. And what happened in that moment, right? It's a crisis. It puts us on alert. And so hopefully through today's session, you can learn how to cope through that crisis and learn how to have a higher quality of life, even while living with a cancer diagnosis and living with a blood cancer diagnosis. Now, before this program, I know that when it was promoted, they said, please turn in your questions. And there were so many good questions that people sent in. How do I make decisions? Can I have a normal life? Where do I go for support? How do I help people understand that I'm going to be living with this for the rest of my life in some way? Geez, I've heard positive thinking is what's going to impact the outcome of my treatment or the outcome of my diagnosis. Is that true? Overall, what can I do to feel better? And when I read these questions, the thing that jumps out at me off the page is that underlying all of these questions is stress, right? You're dealing with an intense situation, a situation that is happening over a prolonged period of time. And I believe that it is important for us to have context to understand how we are responding to the world around us, right? How do we make sense? How do you make sense of the responses that you may have been having since hearing those fateful words, you have cancer, you have leukemia, you have lymphoma, you have multiple myeloma? So before I even talk about how do we manage stress, what I want to do is spend a little bit of time giving you context to understand what happens to us physiologically when we are in a crisis. Because when we have context, it can make it easier to understand what we're going through, and it gives us a new lens at which to view not only how we're responding, but how the people around us may be responding as well. So I want to talk about the nervous system. And if anybody here has heard me present, they've probably heard me talk about the nervous system in the past, and I'm going to talk about the nervous system tonight, and I'll keep talking about it in the future, because so much of our experience of the world is dictated by how our nervous system responds to the world around us. And when we are in a crisis, there is a predictable pattern with which our nervous system responds to try to get us back to a state of equilibrium after we have gotten a cue that there's a threat. And I think that we can all agree here that cancer is a crisis. It's a manageable crisis. It's a crisis that is situated amongst the other crises you've experienced in your life. You know, for some of you here, maybe the cancer diagnosis has been the biggest crisis that you've ever experienced in your life. And for some of you here, maybe you've had other crises, whether they're medically related or not, and this crisis is situated among those other challenging situations that you've been through. But I think we can agree cancer is a crisis. And what we know about how we respond in a crisis, some of the foundational understanding that we have was generated by an endocrinologist named Hans Selye. And Hans Selye, he did research back in the mid-20th century. He was interested in understanding how we respond in a crisis. And what he developed out of that is referred to as the general adaptation syndrome. That really gives us a foundational understanding of how we as humans respond to extreme stressors. And it's a theory that's been built upon over time, but I think it gives a really good foundational understanding of what's going on inside of us as we're trying to navigate a situation that is extremely stressful. So one of the first things that Selye discovered is that we all have a certain resistance to stress level. And think of that as our ability to sort of weather the wear and tear of daily life. And you can think of some people who have a very high resistance to stress. Nothing seems to bother them. They're as cool as a cucumber. These are the people I say, I have a friend, I say, if there was a zombie apocalypse, she's the one I want to find because she is unflappable. And then you can also think about people who have a very low resistance to stress. I call these people are the people that have cancer of the hangnail, right? Everything is an emergency for them. But for the purposes of our discussion, we're going to just assume we all here are somewhere in the middle. So that was the first thing Selye discovered. The second thing Selye discovered is that in the event of a crisis, in the immediacy of a crisis, that crisis has the ability to actually lower our resistance to stress. So in the moment when we need our stress resistance to be full force, it actually gets compromised by the immediacy of that crisis. And Selye called that the alarm phase. Now, when we're in the alarm phase, what happens is likely the stressors around us are going to exceed our ability to absorb them. And the result is that we end up showing signs of stress. And if you look at these lists of signs of stress, you may be able to relate to them and think back to that day you found out about the diagnosis, maybe the days or the weeks after, when you were likely displaying some of your signs of stress. And you can see there's 4 quadrants here because there are 4 different categories of signs that we can have. We can have cognitive signs, emotional signs, behavioral signs, physical signs. It's normal for us to have signs of stress in each of these quadrants, in each of these categories. And I always say it's sort of like if you think about back in the day in a stereo, you'd have the tuner knobs to sort of do the levels of your music. That's how these signs are. Each of us, we have our own kind of pattern of what signs come out and which are sort of the first signs that show that we're under stress and what are the signs that show up later on. So in the immediacy of that crisis, we have our resistance to stress compromised. And then what happens? Then our nervous system gets activated and it comes on board to help us meet the challenges of our environment. And when that happens, we get this rush of stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol, that are going to help us manage what we're going through. And so what happens when those stress hormones come on board is that it doesn't just return us to our normal level of resistance to stress. It actually heightens our resistance to stress, right? Super helpful. That's so helpful for us. And that's the period, the phase that Selye referred to as the resistance phase. Now, this seems like this would be helpful, except here's the challenge, is that many crises are not time limited. They don't happen in this short period of time. They actually happen over a prolonged period of time. Maybe there's multiple stressors that happen in succession. You know, you can think about if you get into a fender bender, right? Somebody rear ends you, your heart might start racing, you might feel worried and fearful, you get out of your car, you check in with the other person, are you hurt? No. Are you hurt? No. Let's exchange information. You have this heightened resistance to be able to get out of your car and do what you need to do. And then the crisis is over and you can return back to your normal resistance of stress. But that's not how it works in a cancer diagnosis, right? You go through treatment, you go through treatment planning. Maybe you go through chemo, you go through a stem cell transplant. Maybe you got to go through maintenance. There's ongoing surveillance. Maybe you have to have ongoing treatment. Maybe the treatment has to change, right? It's this one thing after another after another. And our systems are not designed to stay in that heightened level of resistance of stress indefinitely. That's everybody. We all come pre-programmed with an expiration of how much heightened resistance to stress we can tolerate before our system is going to get exhausted. And what happens is if we are in this prolonged state of resistance to stress, we are eventually going to reach a state where we exhaust our resources and we move into a state of exhaustion. And when we're in that state of exhaustion, we don't just return to our normal level of resistance to stress. That level of resistance to stress actually dips below where it normally would. So what I see a lot in people who are struggling with a cancer diagnosis, especially one that is going to be treated over a long period of time, maybe something that you're going to be dealing with for the rest of your life. What I see is people coming to me in that exhaustion phase, you know, maybe never having had to think about how they were going to manage their stress before because their resistance to stress was sort of adequate to help them manage the daily wear and tear. And they say things to me like, every little thing bothers me. Things that used to not bother me, they bother me now. I'm more irritable with my kids. I'm more short-tempered with my spouse. I can't concentrate the way that I used to, right? All of that makes sense because even if you're in the exhaustion phase of this reaction to the crisis, it doesn't mean that the crisis has ended. It doesn't mean that the stressors are done. The good thing is that we can be intentional about the things that we do so that we can both return our resistance to stress to where it was before. We can actually heighten our resistance to stress so we are more resilient in the face of stressors. And we can also return back to a state of normal level of resistance to stress instead of staying in this resistance phase for so long that we go into the exhaustion phase. So my hope here today is that you guys are going to leave here with some ideas and some tools to think about how may I better be able to manage the stress that I am experiencing related to my cancer or secondary to my cancer diagnosis. You know, one thing, people will come and they'll say, well, I was super stressed out and I think that caused my cancer. Cancer is a very complex disease process, and there isn't one thing that causes cancer. We don't really know. Even people who have a genetic predisposition for cancer are not guaranteed to have cancer. It's not cause and effect. It's just a heightened risk of developing that, right? But what we do know is that once you've been diagnosed with a cancer diagnosis, that people who have a higher ability to manage stress have a higher quality of life and better health outcomes. So I kind of have already alluded to this already, of talking about the fact that I think one of the things that is, I don't want to say it's unique, but I think that it is one of the key aspects of many blood cancers, not all of them, but for many people, when you're diagnosed with a blood cancer, you are dealing with something that is going to be treated as a chronic illness. And that really requires a redefinition of what cancer is. And if you want to pause and think about, how many times you might have heard in the past somebody talk about their cancer diagnosis, and they say, well, I'm feeling really hopeful, or maybe she's really hopeful, or he's really hopeful, right? What does that mean? We don't often talk about what's on the other side of the sentence. Because what typically, when people talk about being hopeful, the part of the sentence they're not saying when they're talking about cancer is, I'm hopeful the cancer is going to go away. I'm hopeful that I'm going to be cured. I'm hopeful that I'm going to be able to end treatment and move beyond this cancer diagnosis. And I think one of the challenges of living with a diagnosis like multiple myeloma, like a diagnosis of leukemia, even dealing with lymphoma, which may require heightened surveillance over a long period of time, is that what to feel hopeful for may shift because you may be living with that diagnosis for the rest of your life. And so what I often talk to people about is, how to shift away from thinking about cancer as episodic to thinking about it as a chronic illness. And I know one of the questions people submitted was, how do I get my family and friends to understand that what I have is not curable? And I think one of the things I would say is sometimes using metaphor and analogy can be helpful in that way. Because, when we think about cancer, typically, we think about it as being this sort of time-limited thing. It's going to go on during a defined period of time. There's, when you finish treatment, that's it. You're done with treatment. Over time, you're going to have more frequent surveillance, but that's going to taper off. And the goal is to get to the point of no evidence of disease. What maybe doctors used to say was cure, although most people I know, most oncologists I know, are hesitant to use that term regardless of the diagnosis. They might just say, we want to get to the point of no evidence of disease. I think a metaphor that can be useful is, to think about other chronic illnesses, right? When we think about somebody with diabetes, we don't think of them getting to that point where they've taken that last insulin shot and they're never going to have to use insulin again, and they're never going to have to monitor their blood sugar levels, right? Even if we get to a place where somebody may be able to wean off of insulin, they're probably always going to be monitoring to make sure, okay, do I need to go back on something to get the disease back in check? And I think with blood cancers, that's often the case, right? That you may go through an initial treatment and phase that may mirror what people with a site-specific cancer experience, right? Where you go through chemo for a set period of time, and maybe you go through a stem cell transplant during a prescribed period of time. And I want to say a note that I'm not a medical professional. My most familiarity is with the myeloma community because of the group that I work with. So I don't want to come off as I'm not going to be able to be exhaustive about naming all of the different iterations of treatment that blood cancers have here. But I do know that, you're going to go through this initial treatment phase and come out of the other side of it. And then what's going to happen? Your doctor's going to talk about, well, now you need to start maintenance therapy. Or, well, now we're going to be monitoring you, every couple months you need to come in and have your blood work so that we can check on you. right? That it is this ongoing process that you are involved in, this ongoing treatment, this ongoing surveillance, where the goal may be different. The goal may not be, we're going to get you to no evidence of disease. The goal may be, we want to get you to a state where the disease is controlled or where the disease is stable. And so that means, Jesus, I got to find a way to live with this, right? That if we look back at my last slide, that idea of sometimes entering into a cancer diagnosis and seeing it as a sprint. I'm going to keep my head down. I'm going to get to the finish line, and then I'm going to take a breath. Then I'm going to have some water. Then I'm going to eat an apple because it's going to be right there. It's 100 meters away, and I'm going to get to the finish line. Whereas with a cancer, a blood cancer that's being treated chronically, I liken to that's like an ultra marathon, right? And with an ultra marathon, and I'm talking about, if you don't know what that is, those are the people who go out and they run like 100 miles at a pop, God bless them. But people who run an ultra marathon, they gotta like stop, they gotta pee, they gotta like have some water, they gotta have some goo, they gotta like fuel up, right? It requires attention to their overall well-being to keep them going. And that head down approach just is not going to get them through the experience. So hopefully, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to leave here today with different ways of thinking about how to approach cancer-related stress. So we're going to talk about 4 broad categories: information seeking, problem solving, social support, and relaxation techniques. And I hope that at least one, I'm hoping that I can give you some concrete tactics that you can take out of here, that you'll leave with at least one thing here that you can think about. How can I apply this in my life to make my quality of life better by making my stress more manageable? So let's talk about seeking information. So when you think about when you were diagnosed, think about the information that you were being bombarded with compared to what your starting point was. When you were diagnosed, had you ever been in a medical crisis? Had you interacted with the medical community? Had you ever interacted with somebody closely that had cancer? Did you even know what the type of cancer was that you were being diagnosed with? Did you understand like how those cells were impacting your body, what the disease process was? Did you understand how they even found it? Did you know the types of treatment? You can just see the complexity of information that you may have known zero to a wealth of information, depending on what knowledge you came into your diagnosis with, what experience you had with medical issues. So, one of the first things that you may have done was either start gathering information or having information thrown at you. So it can be very useful to pause and think about, what information do I have now and what information do I need? And why is that? Because we know that information seeking has several positive outcomes. That when people have the information that they need, they have a restored sense of control. That people who are informed are better able to communicate with their healthcare team and have an improved ability to make decisions. And we also know that people who have the information that they need have reduced anxiety. Now, you'll notice that as I've been saying this, I've been saying the information that they need. And that is because there is certainly a balance between information seeking as a means of stress reduction and information seeking as a symptom of anxiety. So, I think if you are somebody who already does a lot of information seeking, what may be more useful to you than thinking about what information do I need is to be thinking about, how do I feel after I have been reading about my diagnosis? How do I feel after I've watched that webinar through the Leukemia Research Foundation? Do I find that it has clarified things for me? Do I feel like I can take a deep breath and sigh and feel better capable of going into my next doctor's appointment? Or do I find that when I get on the computer, I can't get off? Do I find that the people that are living with me are saying, get off the internet already, you're driving yourself crazy, right? These are things that may be signs that the information seeking has become less productive and more of a symptom of anxiety that may benefit from further exploration, either by talking to your support network or talking to a professional. So let's go, that being said, let's go back to thinking about how do we use information seeking to our benefit as a means of reaching these potential outcomes. Well, the first step is assess what you know, to sit down, and if you haven't done so already, write down what are the facts that you know about your diagnosis. What type of cancer do you have? If there is staging involved, if there's a site involved, that might not be applicable with a blood cancer, but what do I understand about my cancer diagnosis? And also, what do I understand about the treatment? Do I know the names of the treatment? Do I know how many cycles? Do I understand what the possible side effects are? If you're already in treatment, you may already kind of ambiguously know this information, but I would also say helpful to write it down, to just take an inventory of what information you actually know, because the next step is to identify what information do I need? What questions do I have, right? So your first step is what do I know? The second step is what do I need to know, right? So for example, maybe you realize, geez, I have a history of cardiac issues in my family, and I've never really thought to ask, like, will my treatment have an impact on my heart, right? And after you identify the question, to think about who can I go to answer this question. Am I going to go to my oncologist? Am I going to go to the nurse practitioner? Is it a question that, that maybe the technician that when I'm going in, the phlebotomist when I go in might be able to address, to think about who are the people within your healthcare team that might be able to address the question that you're having. The other thing I want to note is you may ask the same question multiple times, right? What we know is that when you are in a crisis, when you are initially diagnosed with cancer, right? That is a highly emotional, provocative experience. And what we know is that a different part of our brain is activated, and we do not process information the way we would under normal circumstances. So there is much information that the doctor may have provided you in the early days of your diagnosis, during the treatment phase of your diagnosis, that you have not retained, or you were not in the state of mind to be able to ask follow-up questions for. So, don't think about, I already asked that question, so I can't ask it again, because you're learning, you're understanding. The questions that may follow that question are going to evolve over time, both with the amount of knowledge and experience you have with your diagnosis, and also with the frame of mind you're able to give to those appointments when you're talking to your doctor. And so let's talk about talking to your doctor, right? And so when you think about communicating with your healthcare team, what I like to talk about is an acronym, and that is to take part. So what does that mean? So take part stands for, oops, I'm just gotta move something out of the way here. I can't figure out how to grab it. There we go. So the P in take part stands for prepare to talk to your healthcare team. And I will say, most people I know do a fairly good job of this part, right? This is the part where you're writing down questions before the appointment. One thing that you could do is like type them up and then leave space underneath each question so that you have a space to write down what the responses are. If you have a symptom that's worrying you, you write down that exact problem, how it started, how long it lasts, what makes it better or worse, right? Don't try to diagnose the problem yourself. You're going there presenting the doctor with information, and bringing a paper and pen to the appointment, being prepared to take in the information that the doctor's going to provide you. I know some people, they have a difficult time themselves tracking that information. I know this can be challenging with COVID, whether or not somebody's allowed to go to the appointment with you. Sometimes family members can be patched into the appointment as a video call or a phone call. Also recording the appointment on your phone can also be a great way to track what the doctor is telling you. And then when you're in the appointment, ask questions. Start with the ones that are most important so you can make sure that those get answered first. One other thing, give a list of your questions to your doctor. Let the doctor know this is my agenda for the appointment. And as I already said, when you're asking those questions, don't self-diagnose what the problem is. If you have a question about symptoms that you're having, describe it in detail to your doctor, because that's what they're there for. That's what they're being paid for. They're being paid to be a diagnostician, to understand and to provide context around what it is you're physically experiencing. Now, most times when I talk to people, they already got the P and the A down. But when I get to the R, that is new information for them to think about. And that is repeat what's been heard. So when you're talking to the doctor, you're taking notes. And when you're nearing the end of the conversation, you're letting your doctor know, this is what I've learned. This is my understanding. Because we as humans, I think, are innately creative. And one of the ways I see that come out is by interpreting what the doctor has said or filling in holes, right? So especially if you're taking in complex information or the doctor's appointment, white coat syndrome is a thing. You feel nervous just going into the doctor. Those are going to compromise how you're understanding the information, how you're absorbing it and taking it in. And that's not just you, that's everybody. That's just how we come built. So, when you slow down to let the doctor know, okay, this is what I heard you say. I heard you say, I have to have 6 more rounds of this chemo, and then we're going to reassess to see if I can stop, right? That allows 2 things to happen. One, it allows the doctor to clarify if there's been a misunderstanding. And the other thing it allows the doctor to do is to yes and you. Is to say yes and, ooh, that makes me realize something important that either I left out or that you haven't absorbed, so let me repeat that. The other thing, is to take part in it, right? Follow up on suggestions, follow up on the information that's provided. The other thing, how many of you call the doctor or follow up with an email over the patient portal to give feedback about the appointment, to give feedback about what was recommended to you. Hey, it's really working. Thanks for giving that to me. I don't quite understand. I think I tried to do what you told me to do. It doesn't seem to be effective. When you see the doctor next, let him know whether the last appointment was helpful or not. Right? If the doctor's slowing down and explaining something to you, if you repeating back what you heard and the doctor are saying yes or hey, yes, and that really helped, let the doctor know that. Geez, that was so helpful that we had that time at the end to just review the information. Geez, it was so helpful for me to give you that list of questions the last time we met because I really felt like I left here with the information that I needed. You're for many of you, if not all, this is going to be a long-term relationship. This isn't a spring fling. Unless you choose to get a second opinion, go to a different physician, you may be with this oncologist for years. That's the hope, right? The hope is you're going to be around for years and years and years to have a relationship with this doctor. And you want that relationship to be one that is fulfilling, mutually respectful, and where you can feel good about your interactions with that doctor. Okay. I'm going to pause for just a second. I'm going to go to the next slide. I like to pause. It's hard because in this virtual world, I'm still trying to figure out how to leave enough space to see if there's any questions, just to make sure that I'm not going too fast or there's nothing that I need to cover a little bit more. So you feel free. I'm going to go on to the next topic, but if there's something you need me to ever go back to, please feel free to put that in the chat. So I want to move us to talk about problem solving. Now, and when I talk about problem solving, what I'm talking about here is a strategic way of approaching problems. And when I think about problems, what I'm really talking about is stressors, right? Stress is what goes on inside of our body. Stress is our biophysiological response to our environment. Stressors are the things going on around us that cause us to experience stress, that cause us to have a stress response. And so, when we think about problem solving, we're really thinking about what stressors can I do something about so that I can lower my overall stress level and perhaps make it more manageable. Some stressors you have to live with, right? The stressor that you have to go to the doctor on a certain frequency, right? That's a stressor. You can manage the stress around going to the doctor's office, but you can't problem solve away going to the actual doctor's office. However, there are some stressors that maybe you can do something about. And even if it's not a stressor that is directly related to the cancer diagnosis, if it is helping to improve your stress level, it will leave you with more resources to manage the stress that you'll have to deal with related to the cancer diagnosis. And what we know is that when people take an intentional problem-solving strategy towards their stressors, that they have an increased sense of control and optimism, their stress is better managed. Of course, that leads to an improved quality of life. And when we become good problem solvers, when we practice a strategic method of problem solving, then we become even more effective at identifying solutions to future problems. So what do I mean by a strategic problem solving method? So it's really like this 5-step strategy. I am going to focus most on steps 1 and 2, because I think if we start out on the right foot, we kind of set the stage for success. So when it comes to a problem solving strategy, we're defining the problem first so we can really understand the problem. Then we're brainstorming, we're looking for solutions. After we've come up with a list of potential solutions, then we're trying to figure out, okay, which solution is the best fit for me right now? We're going to try that solution out and see what happens and assess and circle back as needed. So I want to spend the most time now moving to just talk about how do we define the problem, okay? And I think that the way we define the problem is going to really set us up for how successful the solutions we come up with are afterwards. So, for example, I'm going to use this example of fatigue, okay? I think fatigue is often something that people encounter, whether it's related to the diagnosis itself or it's related to the treatment. But how we define the problem of fatigue is going to vary from person to person. And what we want to solve by addressing the fatigue is also going to vary from person to person. So when we're trying to define a problem, the first thing we want to know is the who, what, where, when. When does it happen? Where does it happen? Who's involved? How does it take place? So you see, I have a little example here to just sort of illustrate, right? So when we're talking about fatigue, maybe somebody's going to say, it's just this exhaustion. I feel like no matter what I do, by noon, I hit this wall and I just don't have energy for anything else. Now, what makes that a problem? What are the bad results from when you hit that wall? Now, this could vary from person to person, right? If you don't have kids or you don't have young kids, Spending time with your kids is not going to be the result of this problem for you. But in my little example, the result of the problem is I can't get things done around the house, and then I don't have energy to spend time with my kids. And how do I feel about it? I get angry, I get frustrated, and then I have these intense feelings like I'm failing as a parent, I'm failing as a spouse. Now, this is the interesting thing. We don't have to take into account or do what other people would think that we should do. But I do think it is useful. It's a useful exercise to pause when you're thinking about defining the problem and think about how would other people expect me to handle this problem. And here's the thing, going back to that idea of like how we define the problem is going to determine whether or not the solutions we come up with are appropriate or not, right? If the problem with the fatigue is that I don't spend time with my kids and I can't get my household tasks done, and somebody comes in and says, well, the solution to that, just deal with a messier house, just take it easy, don't be so hard on yourself, just rest, take a nap, you don't need to worry about that. Is that going to solve this person's problem? No, it's not. If the problem that as they defined it is, I get really hard on myself and it's really hard for me to actually give myself permission to rest. And I really like when I have that fatigue, like I really want to get rid of these guilt feelings I have. If that's how they're defining the problem, then the resting, the taking it easy, the figuring out how to learn with a messier house, those might be completely appropriate solutions. But resting, taking it easy, dealing with a messier house is not going to address this person's ability to get household tasks done or to spend time with their kids, right? So, if we skip ahead to what do I want to have happen, right? I want to have the household tasks done on a regular basis. And this person says, I want to feel less guilty on bad days. So that is a part of it for this person. Backing up a second, I think it's also helpful to think about, what kind of speed bumps might you encounter as you're trying to address this problem, as you're trying to address this stressor, right? Do you have people in your life that may not be cooperative? May it be hard for you to implement any sort of change yourself? May you discover that there's other things that need to be put in place before you can address this problem? Sometimes when we start being strategic about defining the problem that we initially think of, what we discover is another problem crops up, right? So like oftentimes when I'm talking to people about fatigue, part of what comes up is that there's a real time management issue there. I'm saving all of the things that I want to do that are going to be nourishing for me to the end of the day when I have no energy left, and I'm spending my morning scrubbing the toilet, so I feel totally unfulfilled at the end of the day, right? So sometimes the fatigue may be less of the problem, and the time management of like, am I paying myself first becomes the problem. And that's where thinking through the problem, not just rushing to figure out solutions, but thinking through what makes this a problem, how do I feel about it, what might other people say, what do I really want to address by coming up with solutions, can be really meaningful to make sure that you're on the right track. Because poorly defining the problem can lead to ineffective solutions. So how do we get to solutions, right? Let's say we figured out what the problem is, we've defined it, we've determined what we want to do, we've determined what we want the result to be from our solutions. The next most important thing that we need to do is we need to brainstorm. And what most people I encounter do is when they've got a problem, they come up with one solution, and then they try to implement that solution. And sometimes it works, and that's great. And then many times it doesn't work. And then what happens? Well, for most people, that's demoralizing. It's demoralizing, it's demotivating. You're already feeling crummy because the problem is there. You're already feeling stressed out. And now see, look, I tried to solve it and it didn't work. And then we feel discouraged, and then we may not feel like we can do anything about it, right? It can heighten the stress from the original problem if we try to solve it and we can't with that first solution. And that's why when you are trying to address a stressor in your life, to brainstorm what are 6 to 10 potential solutions that I could potentially use to try to combat this problem. And when we're brainstorming, this is not about coming up with an action plan. This is not about coming up with how feasible or realistic the solution is. It's about allowing your mind to be creative and to just generate as many solutions as possible. Nothing stupid, nothing silly. You don't have to worry about if the idea will work. You know, if we go back to this person over here, if she defines the problem and it's related to the housework and the fatigue, this person may say, well, one of the potential solutions is, you know, I could hire a maid. I'm going to hire a maid and they're going to take care of everything around the house. And then that's going to solve the issue. And that could possibly solve the problems that result from my fatigue. Right. But the person might like start saying, well, you know, I can't really afford a maid, but by letting themselves say that, they might say, well, another solution may be, you know, are there people, like, it'd be helpful, could I identify some people to help with some of the tasks that I could kind of delegate to people so I can feel like I can do something to manage my fatigue while also making sure that these household tasks get done. That person may not have been able to arrive at that solution if they didn't allow themselves to almost daydream about what it would be like to be able to have enough money to afford a maid to come in and take care of everything when they're feeling fatigued. So again, don't worry about if it's silly. And you may notice that when you start brainstorming and you allow yourself to just come up with different ideas, that as you do that, one idea will allow you to come up with an additional potential solution. Okay. So I'm going to move on to social support. I don't see any questions, but feel free if you have any. So, you know, I feel like, you know, I was thinking about including social support here, which I'm going to include social support here. There's a slide, there's several slides talking about it. And I was thinking about kind of how pat this is, right? Like you've probably heard people say this before, right? You have to have a community of people around you, right? Make sure you lean on your social support. But what's more problematic is, how do I do that? How do I make the most of my social support network so that I feel like my support needs are being met? And hopefully after a couple slides, you'll leave here with some considerations and ideas of how to take full advantage and take full benefit of the people in your life that can help you get your needs met as you're coping with the cancer diagnosis. And you know, I think that there's many benefits of social support, right? We know that people with adequate social support have lower cancer-related distress and lower distress in general. That people who have adequate social support have a higher mental health quality of life, they have improved health outcomes, and they experience reduced cancer-related symptoms and signs. So even though I'm not a medical professional, I can say that if you have adequate social support, that it may lead to a decrease in the suffering associated with the signs and symptoms that you experience related to your cancer diagnosis. And I want to highlight the fact, you keep hearing me say adequate, right? And why am I saying that? I'm saying that because the level of social support that you may need may differ from the person sitting next to you, which may differ from the person sitting next to them, right? So, you know, the idea of looking within to determine what do I need, and to step away from the dangers of social comparison, right? A person sitting next to you, maybe they just need that, they've got that one person that they talk to, and that it meets their emotional support needs. I have a client like that. You know, they say, I've got my best friend and I lean on her, and she's there for me when I need to talk to her, and that's all I need. But for many other people, that's not adequate, right? I need that person to talk to, and I need the person I can turn to where I know I don't have to talk about the cancer, right? I need to have that person that makes me laugh. I need to have that person that will go for walks with me, right? And sometimes that's one person, but for many people, that's about looking and thinking about a constellation of people that may be able to meet your different support needs different from one another. So first part of thinking about how do I maximize my social support? How do I get the most out of the people surrounding me that are here to support me? The first thing is make a list. Who are the people that you have regular contact with? And you can see this includes your family, both maybe your immediate family and your extended family, maybe the family you live with, but also the family that is far afield. And I should say, when I talk about regular contact, that means in person, that means phone, that means email, that means Zoom. So anybody that you, and when I say regular contact, I would say like anybody that you have contact with maybe like once a month or more, right? Some of the people on here you may see daily, but there may be people in your life that are still a part of your social support network, but you see on a little less frequent basis, that you have contact with on a little less frequent basis. Once we go outside of our family, though, there are all these other different kind of categories of people that are a part of our support network. They're friends, babysitter, people that are a part of our religious community, whether they are faith leaders or other congregants, thinking about the members of your healthcare team. If you are working, the people that are your coworkers, even thinking about like when you go in, do you see the same people? Every time you go in for an infusion, are you seeing the same people time and time again, right? Because those may be people that you have made a connection with that, that offer a certain form of emotional support for you. Now, once you have this inventory, and I think I will say a lot of times people, when I meet with them, they're able to sort of rattle off, okay, here are the different people that I turn to for support. Oh, and hey, here's some people I hadn't really thought of, but yeah, like, you know, that neighbor that calls every so often and asks how I'm doing, or that woman from church that will just randomly drop off a casserole that they may not have initially thought of, but okay, they add to the list. So once you have your list, now what you want to do is you want to create what's called a closeness circle. And what does that mean? That means taking pause and thinking about how close you feel to each person on your list. So in the middle of this bullseye is you. And every concentric circle going out from you is another layered removed. So the people in the inner circle, right? Those are your like closest people to you. Those are maybe the people that get most, if not all, of the information about your diagnosis. Those are the people that may have insight, whether because you share it with them or you kind of let it hang out as far as how you're feeling about the diagnosis and how the diagnosis is impacting you emotionally. And then as you go further out, you know, think about those people, you know, maybe you don't share everything with them. Maybe you see them less frequently, you know, but they're not as close to you as others. And so maybe we think about some people falling into predictable circles, right? You know, maybe your partner's in your inner circle, then your sibling, then your best friend, then your coworkers in that outer ring. For many people, though, the type of relationship that you have with a person does not predict the quality of that relationship. So what do I mean by that? I mean that just because you have a certain type of relationship, it doesn't dictate how close you feel to them. You may have a sibling that maybe for one person, their sister is in their inner ring, but maybe you and your sister have never been close, right? Maybe you've went into this diagnosis and you and your partner were having relationship issues. And the diagnosis, rather than bringing you closer together, has exacerbated those issues. So even though maybe you want to feel close to them, right? Maybe what you actually experience is, I feel closer to my best friend right now than I do to my partner. So doing the closest circle and thinking about it as an honest inventory for yourself to think about, who do I feel the most comfortable with? Who gets the most information from me? Who do I feel like I've tried to open up to? So after we have a closeness circle, then we want to think about, what type of support do I get from each of these people? And what is the quality of that support? So what do I mean by that? So there are two different types of support we can get from people. We can get task support and we can get emotional support, right? Task support these people that help by doing, and emotional support is they're there for you. They help by being and talking to and with you. And then when I talk about quality of support, what I mean is, when I reach out to them and I ask for support, or when they come to me and they try to provide me with support, do I have a positive experience or do I have a negative experience, right? I was just talking with a client the other day, and they were talking about their sibling. And they were saying, I know that she means well. I know that she wants to be there for me, and she's trying to provide me with emotional support. But all I end up feeling is misunderstood. And I end up feeling like she's just giving me advice and telling me what I should do. So that's an attempt at emotional support, but it's a very negative experience, right? One of the things that I often, when I talk about with people, I will say this often gets people thinking a little bit differently. So I hope maybe you may have that experience too, is that it's normal for people to be good at one or the other type of support. That some people are really good at task support and some people are really good at emotional support, but they're not good at both and they're not good at the other one. And so what people often can experience is a mismatch, right? That they're going to somebody who would be really good at task support, but they go to them trying to sort of have a shoulder to cry on, and that person is just says sort of has what I call foot and mouth disease, or doesn't know how to respond, right? Or vice versa, right? Somebody who you really want them to be willing to drive you to the appointment, and every time you do, they kind of flake. But if you call them and you were tearful, boy, would they like drop everything to talk to you. So when you think about the people on your list, what you want to think about is step back from what they have provided you and take a look at that person and think, what type of support is this person good at providing? And do I have a positive or negative experience when I'm asking support from them? And when you do that, you can go back to your closeness circle and kind of rate people, right? So you may find, you're lucky enough, you have a partner that is both emotionally present and willing to take on tasks, and you have a positive experience with them. Maybe you look to your coworker and you're like, I would never turn to my coworker to like talk to them to get advice, to like, if I was upset, like that's not what I'm going to go to them for. But boy, like they are the first person to offer to make a meal chain for me when I was diagnosed, right? I know that they would like stop by the grocery store and pick me up stuff if I needed it. And what I think this can also reveal is, maybe some of the people that you're turning to when you're having that negative experience, to step back and think, is the type of support I'm going to them for the type of support they're able to provide, right? Maybe part of the negative experience is I'm turning to somebody for task support when they would really be better, I'd be better suited to turn to them for emotional support. Because at the end of the day, taking an approach like this, it doesn't address I want to acknowledge it doesn't address the disappointment that you may experience, that you would like to be able to turn to your sister for emotional support, but they're really good at task support, right? It doesn't address that. But what it may address is it may address ensuring that your overall support needs are being met. That just because sis isn't really great at emotional support doesn't mean that that it stops you there and that you don't turn to other people to get those needs met. Because I see that a lot, right? We go to people that are kind of in our first line. We go to the people in our inner circle. We feel comfortable with them. We're really hopeful that they're going to be able to meet our needs. And that's, it's hard to ask for help. It's hard to ask whether it's emotional support or task support. If you don't have a lot of experience doing that, that can be very difficult. And so then if you turn to somebody and you have a negative experience, right? They put you off, or they don't show up, or whatever it is, that can be very demoralizing. And so it can be hard to think about how to push past that, to look more broadly at your social network, to think, Jesus, just because I went to her and it didn't work out, doesn't mean that there's not one or two or three people that I could turn to and get my needs met, even if this one person couldn't show up in the way that I had wanted. And then finally, when you're thinking about doing that social support inventory, what are your own support needs? What do you need by task support? What do you need by emotional support? And one thing I want to highlight here is something that I hear a lot. You're already hearing that a lot, right? I've already said many times something that I hear a lot, but something that comes up frequently is when it comes to task support is, well, I don't really need that. I don't need that. I'm past that phase. I don't need that. Like, I don't need somebody to bring a meal. I don't need somebody to help me pick up the house. I don't need somebody to take the kids. Like, I really needed that when I was in the intense phase of treatment, and I really shouldn't need that anymore. When I hear that, what I ask is I like to slow that person down and say, if you had that task support on board, if you have people that want to help you and the way they shine is through task support, if you could have task support in one of these areas, what would that free you up to do so that you could have a better quality of life? If you could, it's because sometimes asking for the task support is not about being physically compromised and unable to do it, although maybe that was a time when maybe you were forced to rely on people for task support. But task support can also be, if I look at myself holistically, how meaningful would it be for me to have this type of support, even if I can physically do it myself, because it is going to help me. If I have somebody, yes, I can cook a meal, but I cook the meal and then I'm exhausted. And then after dinner, I don't have the energy to play with my kids. So I can do it. But if my friend who I know is always willing to split a meal and drop food off for me, and if I take her up on that offer, even though I can do it, if I take her up on that offer, what would I do with that energy that I saved that would have been spent on making dinner instead? Right. So to think creatively about how to maximize it, especially, certainly one thing that can come up when you're doing your social support network, I want to acknowledge this, is that you start to look at your social support network and what you realize is, geez, I have some holes and I need to bolster my social support network. That can occur, right? And that may be something that benefits from talking with the people in your social support network. Sometimes, that's when coming and talking to a professional can be helpful. How do I strengthen and broaden my social support network? For other people, what can happen, though, is that there are a lot of untapped resources that people are underutilizing that could really improve their stress level and improve their quality of life. Okay, still no questions. I must just be covering everything. Hopefully that's what the case is, and that you haven't relaxed into a state of calm bliss through the dulcet tones of my voice. So and on that note, let's talk about relaxation and relaxation as a way to cope. So lots of benefits from relaxation techniques. And I'm going to talk in a moment about why, to give you some context of why relaxation techniques are so beneficial and so important. So you can see here, quality of life issues that can be addressed both physically and emotionally when we intentionally make relaxation techniques a part of our life. So why is that? So let's go back to when I was talking earlier about that stress response, right? In the immediacy of a crisis, we go through this alarm phase, we go through this resistance phase, and we can go into this exhaustion phase. All of that is mediated by our nervous system, right? We have this part of our nervous system. We have this part of our nervous system that is responsible for keeping us in homeostasis, right? Keeping us in a state that tells us everything is okay enough and maintains just sort of regular functioning in our body, those involuntary processes like heart rate, like your immune functioning, like your digestive system, right? There's a part of our nervous system that's responsible for that. And that same part of our nervous system is responsible for responding when we get a cue that there's a danger. It is the same part of our nervous system that is responsible for putting us into alert and mobilizing us in the face of a threat, right? And so when we get a cue, and those cues can be many when it comes to dealing with a cancer diagnosis, right? Those cues can be thinking about an upcoming doctor's appointment. Those cues can be thinking about an upcoming treatment. Those cues can be awaiting test results. Those cues can just be thinking about the fact, oh my God, I have cancer, right? All of those can light up our nervous system and take us away from that state of homeostasis. And it causes us to adaptively respond, right? It is adaptive for us to respond to a perceived threat with either mobilization, which is that sense of alarm, let's get going, let's do something, we've got to fix this, we've got to figure out how to make this better, right? But in that state where we're like keyed up, there's unease, you're kind of like in a state of hypervigilance, right? That's one way that we can respond when we've gotten a cue of danger. The other way that we can respond when we get a cue of danger is immobilization. And that's just like shut down. One way that people often relate to that is like feeling numb, kind of feeling detached, like I'm not really feeling anything about this, right? It's just no emotions related to it. And you can think about like how adaptive those two responses can be, right? Like in the immediacy of a cancer diagnosis, and there's a lot to do, and you're just trying to figure out how to get all your ducks in the row, right? That would be very adaptive to be in go mode and be like on alert and figuring out what you needed to do next. Just as much as if in the face of a threat, you go into that kind of numb state where you're kind of not feeling anything, just kind of there, but not really there. You can think about how adaptive that can be, right? Like it kind of protects you from being too overwhelmed by the intensity of what's going on around you. The challenge is that we don't want to stay in that state because it puts our nervous system, it takes our nervous system away from homeostasis and away from regular heart rate, regular immune system functioning, regular digestive system functioning, regular breathing, right? It compromises those normal functions in order to put us in this state of survival. And as I mentioned earlier, okay to be in that state of survival for a short period of time. But what we don't want to have happen is that we get into that state of survival and then we can't get out of it. And one of the ways that we can get out of that survival state is by sending cues to our nervous system that in the moment we're okay enough, right? Because what your nervous system does when it responds with mobilization or immobilization is it responds the way it would if there was a bear chasing you through the woods, right? When your nervous system causes this physiological response to the thought, oh my God, right, I have cancer. Oh my God, I have that doctor's appointment. What is the doctor going to say? Oh geez, that stem cell transplant's coming up. What's that going to be like, right? Those are all super nerve-wracking experiences. Maybe even as I'm naming them, your heart, you've noticed your heart racing as I'm saying them, right? But what is going on in your body is your body is preparing to figure out how to get away from a bear, right? Is the doctor's visit a bear chasing you in the woods that's going to maul you? No. Is the treatment a bear that's going to pin you down on the ground and eat you? No. But that's what's going on in your body. So we want to honor the fact that our body, our nervous system is trying to do something to take care of us by going into that mobilized or immobilized state. But we also want to try to coax it back into a state of homeostasis, because that's where we know that optimal functioning occurs. That's where we know that we are going to be able to be more flexible and more resilient. That's the state when we're going to be more capable of reaching out for support. It's going to be when we're in homeostasis, that's the state where we're going to be able to feel like we can do what we need to do, and maybe even have a little bit of ability to plan a little bit ahead, right? When we're in homeostasis, that's when we can tune into being in the moment versus allowing our mind to go into a loop and thinking what if and what if and what if. And I see, oh, somebody's just commenting. Well, thank you for the comment. So, you know, to think about what can we do to try to send signals to our body, thank you, but there is no bear here chasing us through the woods. And we have a nervous system reset superpower. It's something that you've been doing this whole presentation, hopefully. It's something that you need to do to stay alive. We often do it without thinking, but we can do it with intention. And when we do it with intention, it helps to send a message to our nervous system that it is okay to return to homeostasis. And maybe some of you have already guessed what that is, but our reset superpower is breathing. We all know how to do it. We do it all the time without thinking. But when we bring conscious awareness to breathing, it has this beautiful ability to send a message just to the right part of our nervous system to click us into a state of homeostasis. Because the part of our nervous system that is responsible for quickening our respiration rate is the same part of our nervous system that gets activated when we get cued that there is a danger. Okay. So when we are stressed and our body responds, when there's a stressor and our body responds to that stress, the part of our nervous system that causes our heart to flutter, that causes our breath to get faster and shallower, that part of our nervous system is in the driver's seat. And when we take intentional breaths, what that sends to our nervous system is it says, oh, right, there is no bear. I do not need my heart to be racing right now. I do not need my breath to be fast and shallow, right? I need my breath to be regular. I need my heart rate to be regular. I need my digestion to be on board. I need my immune system to be on board. And all of that can be made possible by doing relaxed breathing. And I think we talk more about breath work now, right? If you've ever done yoga, you talk about breathing. If you've ever done meditation, you talk about breathing. I think I see many people where they've heard the breathing, but they haven't necessarily had the connection of why, right? So hopefully, to think about, there is a physiological reason why breathing, intentional breathing, relaxed breathing is so powerful, because you are actually helping to reset your nervous system. And I think maybe, if you would even care to join me here, we can even practice taking a few relaxed breaths. And if you don't feel up for that, that's okay. You can just observe to see what it's like, right? And you can do breathing. The other thing that's so lovely about deep breathing, it's totally transportable. You can do it wherever you go. You can do it and nobody's going to know necessarily that you're doing it. So if you're waiting in the doctor's office, right, nobody's going to give you a side eye because you're doing jumping jacks or something, right? All it requires is to sit comfortably, lie comfortably. You can close your eyes if you want. You don't have to. Sometimes that's not comfortable, and closing your eyes actually makes your heart rate faster, right? And what you're doing when you do relaxed breathing is you're taking a steady breath in for 4, you're holding your breath for a few moments, and then you're exhaling for 4. So you're breathing in through your nose, holding, and exhaling through your mouth, right? So if we're doing that together, right, we would inhale for 4, hold for 2, and exhale for 4, right? We're going to inhale for 4, hold, and exhale. Okay. Inhaling and exhaling. And the thing that is lovely about relaxed breathing is it's something we can do. We breathe without thinking, but it is also a skill we can learn. And the more we practice it, the better we get at it, and the more portable it becomes. In the beginning, you may find that you have to do deep breathing for several minutes before you start to notice your nervous system quiet down, right? But as you go on and you do it more often, you begin to realize the benefits of it more quickly, and it becomes more effective when you're in a moment of crisis. So one thing that I always say to people is, even when you're not feeling stressed, you're not feeling overtly stressed, that is the perfect time to practice relaxed breathing. It's like dress rehearsal. It's like practicing a presentation in the mirror before you give it in real life. Okay. Now, in addition to breathing, there's many other techniques that you can use. Some of them are intentional relaxation techniques that you can use, but then there's also outlets. There's also things that you can do that may help you to reset your nervous system, right? So when we think about a mind-body approach, so breathing is one of them. We can think about things like yoga, stress reduction, Tai Chi, meditation, but perhaps having a creative outlet. Do any of you journal where any of you doodlers? Or I think another thing that's super lovely is coloring books. Right now they've got those coloring books for adults, which can be very relaxing to the nervous system and just help the nervous system to slow down and bring it back to that state of homeostasis. Having social connection, thinking about, is there that one person, those 1 or 2 people that you find when you're with them, you just feel yourself sigh after you've been with them for a while, okay? That they bring this energy to you that tells you that everything's okay. And I will say there is a physiological reason for that, because one of the cues that we get, one of the ways we get cues of whether everything's okay enough or uh-oh, we're in danger. One of the pathways of that cue is through other people, right? So we take in a cue, our nervous system responds to the nervous system of other people to let us know, are we safe or are we in danger? And so to identify those people that give you that sense of calm and safety and capitalizing on that, right? to help bring your system into a state of equilibrium. All right, so let's talk about now, what do I do with all this? You just talked at us for an hour and 20 minutes, Priscilla. How do I translate this into my life, right? Okay, so what are some steps that you can take? You know, number one, going back to that information sharing. Reflect on your diagnosis. What do you already know? What do you need to know? And then taking that information and using it to talk with your doctor, right? Maybe some of it may be asking new questions or re-asking questions to gather more understanding. Maybe it may be going to your doctor and saying, you know, I was just thinking and I want to just check in to see, like, am I understanding this right? Am I understanding why you suggested the treatment plan that you did? Am I understanding how the medication is working to help keep my numbers in check? Right? Take part, right? Thinking about how do you prepare for doctor's appointments? What do you do? Oops, went too fast. What do you do while you're in the doctor's appointment to make sure that you're making the most out of that experience? And then reflect on the stressors in your life. You know, when I was talking about problem solving, are there stressors in your life that could benefit from problem solving? Are there stressors in your life that are not related to the diagnosis that, if you could address them, would free up more of your gas tank so you had more to keep you going related to the cancer diagnosis? And again, you know, when you're thinking about defining that problem, really getting detailed before you jump to the stage of deciding what you're going to do about the problem, is to take a step back and say, how do I understand this problem? When does it occur? What makes it a problem for me? What input have I gotten from other people about this? Because, you know, sometimes people have a good idea. Or sometimes that also lets us know, like, what barriers we may come up with as we're trying to implement solutions. And then also, big thing, don't just land on one solution. Even if you come with a solution and you're like, I think I'm going to try that, you know, pause for a moment and think about, like, what are some other things that I could do? What are some other options so that if choice number one doesn't work out, I don't feel like I'm left holding the bag. I feel like I can figure out a next step for myself. You know, really thinking about your social support and your closeness circle, you know, and when I say thinking about it, what I really mean is writing it, sitting down with a paper and pencil, writing down a list for yourself. You know, when we write things down, we process things differently. And so even if you've held in mind your social support network, the process of writing it down may surprise you in the people that you have forgotten to identify, right? The people that you've not included when you think about, maybe you're only thinking about the people in your first circle and you're not thinking about the second or third circle, but boy, is there some untapped resource there. And then I think the thing I'll emphasize the most here is who is good at task and who is good at emotional support. I see that so frequently, is somebody going to somebody for task support that's good for emotional support and vice versa. So really thinking, like, are some of those negative experiences that I've been having, are they really about mismatches? And if I went to person A for emotional support and person B for task support, I would have a much better experience and feel better supported overall. Because at the end of the day, the purpose is to make sure that you have your support needs met. Oops. And then finally, thinking about how can you make relaxation techniques a part of your daily routine. You know, practicing relaxed breathing. You know, if you look up diaphragmatic breathing, deep breathing, relaxed breathing, you will find a host of resources. A lot of us with smartwatches, they come preloaded with a breathing exercise that will lead you through that pattern breathing of inhaling, holding, and exhaling. There's also a plethora. If you Google it, you'll find all kinds of YouTube clips of people that can lead you through that if you feel a little unsure of yourself. And then also thinking about, like, what have you done for relaxation in the past? right? Are there things that you've done in the past that, you know, were on that list I showed of relaxation toolbox? Are there things that you've done in the past that, you know, kind of fell to the wayside because of the intensity of the cancer experience and it's time to bring them back in? Or maybe is now a time to explore additional options? I feel like I do have to put a plug in. I know Savina mentioned it at the top of our hour here. You know, lots of options through the Cancer Wellness Center, support services, educational programming, wellness programs. If you have a multiple myeloma diagnosis, we'd love to see you at the multiple myeloma group. It's on the first Wednesday of the month from 7 to 8:30. Next month, we're going to have a speaker on the immune system and vaccines. Normally, it's just an open forum for people to share and ask questions and give updates. I've included my contact information here, so if you have any questions about that group, you can feel free to get in touch with me.
It doesn't look like there are any questions being submitted. Your presentation was incredibly thorough. Thank you so much for doing this evening. Yeah, we'll take a look here. It looks like just some compliments of you, Priscilla. So
Great. Thank you.
and I know you got a lot of the questions people pre-submitted as well ahead of time. So I know you tried to address many of the questions in advance through your presentation.
Yeah, and my information is there. So if it feels like you get off of here, maybe you're processing. I know sometimes the questions don't come until after the proverbial door has shut. So feel free to reach out to me, or you can reach out to the Leukemia Research Foundation to get in touch with me, because I'm happy to be in touch.